What I want to talk about is the frame of reference that someone has in approaching Torah. In other words, we think of Torah as objective, we think of Torah as expressing an idea. And then we perceive that we just have to listen to it. We just have to read it and we get it. What we don't recognize is how we have perceptions before we even approach it. In other words, we already have preconceived notions. And when we read it, we read from these preconceived notions, or we approach from these preconceived notions. And let me give you what I think is a pretty good example of this. The law of Sota. Okay, the law of Sota is that if a husband accuses a wife of adultery, has warned this wife to stay away from this certain man, she doesn't stay away with him, she spends time with this person alone, he can then take her up to the Beis Hamikdash and give her this water where this parchment is scraped into it and so forth, and she drinks it, and if nothing happens, it means that she didn't do anything, and she can go back with her husband, and everything will be fine and so forth. And the Gemara says maybe another kid or whatever. The other viewpoint is she actually did something. If she committed adultery, her whole gut would blow up. A miraculous event. Okay. The point is when you read this story, how do you look at it? So people perceive it as from a 21st century perspective, it's pretty derogatory about women. It would seem to be pretty derogatory about women. I was on a Passages TV show with a professor called Una Eisenstadt, who made a very interesting statement. She said, from the perspective of the ancient world, you have to understand how progressive this law was. Okay? Because in the ancient world, if a husband even had an inkling that his wife was going to commit adultery, he could kill her, right? Beat her, kill her, whatever it is, right? So the fact that he couldn't just kill her based upon a whim, a suspicion, and so forth, he had to go through this process. This actually was a furtherance of women's rights. Now, especially if you didn't believe in miracles, right? If you were a secularist, you'd say, wow, they came up with this process and nothing will ever happen to the woman. So therefore, basically, from a secularist perspective, you know, this law basically was a way to protect women who were being suspected of adultery. Okay? So from a perspective of that world, it was very progressive. Now, the fact is that I don't see one way or the other. I mean, the fact is that you look at it from a perspective. She was saying, if you had this perspective and came across this law, and you were a person in 200 BC, you'd sit there and say, "Whoa, we're giving women's rights." Nowadays, we look at this law and saying, "Well, it seems to be problematic to it." Now, the truth is that it comes to the issue. So, what's the frame of reference that you have when you approach Torah? Now, the fact is that the world goes through changes. Okay, our thoughts change, and therefore it turns out what's really being indicated to us is that Torah has to be understood from the perspective of our own frame of reference, our own individuality. we all have gone through different life experiences. We've all gone through different perceptions. And that's going to affect the way we read a text. It's going to affect the way we read anything. And therefore, there are clearly elements within the Orthodox world that in a certain way want to maintain the status quo, even in terms of the societal aspect, right? My grandfather didn't have a telephone, so I'd like not to have a telephone. In other words, you want to create almost the same, I took telephone because there's no one like that today, but I want to almost maintain the same status quo, because that means that from the same status quo you have the same perception of people and so forth and so forth. But the fact is that we all go through our experiences, and therefore when we look at a text or we look at anything, we are bringing our own being to the perspective. That's on an individual basis. It's on a societal basis, and so forth. I mean, there are people who contend that let's say certain rabbis are known to have had this very loving marriage, and certain rabbis have been known to have much more difficult marital lives, and somehow you see that seeping into their perception and how they study and so forth. And it may not be that they're being biased or whatever, is that they don't necessarily know otherwise. You know what I mean? I mean, the fact is if you've never experienced a true loving relationship, how do you really understand what the term love means? A lot of the things that we understand come about from our experiences, right? It's like
how
a color.
do you define love?
That's a question itself, and that comes down to be part of the issue. When you hear certain people define love, certain people define love in a very practical way, very pragmatic. Okay, they are there for each other in a very pragmatic way. Other people would sit there and say, "Gee, I don't think that's the way I define love," and a lot of it comes from their own experiences.
How does Judaism then define romance?
Same.
Is romance integral to love?
You can ask the question whether Judaism looks upon romance as positive or not. I remember talking to a frum woman back when I was dating, and mentioning the fact that romance would be a very important aspect of what I would be looking for in a relationship, and she specifically said, "No, I'm not interested." So you have it. You have it. It's fleeting. What I need are more solid basis for a relationship. The fact that we get along and stuff like that. But and romance being that perception of that special feeling or whatever. But the fact is even in terms of defining romance, in many ways it's very personal. It's almost like defining a color. To find purple to someone who's blind. So in certain ways, if a person never had that experience, how do they understand it?
Does love also include meeting a need? Or is love totally irrelevant to meeting needs?
No, I think that love has an aspect of meeting a need. I mean, the fact is that it's an interesting question, because that's a fundamental question of a distinction between Christianity and Judaism. Because Christianity said the ultimate love is selfless, so it's not there to meet a need. That's why they perceived sexual love to be secondary to maternal or parental love, because when you had sexual love, the person also met the sexual need. In Judaism, saying that sexuality is part of the husband-wife relationship of love, and that from Jewish perspective is the highest form of love, because that's the love that's compared to the Kodesh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael is always the love of husband and wife. The fact is that it is there understood to be the fact that part of love is fulfilling a need in the other. I mean, but the thing is that what we look at, or what we don't recognize, is how we bring our own perceptions as we study and as we investigate things, and we have different ideas, and this also touches upon, let's say, the issue of Jewishness, which was alluding to before with you guys. What exactly we think in terms of a Jew? If you think in terms of anti-Semitism, then Hitler's definition of a Jew is going to become very, very significant. If you're not thinking in terms of anti-Semitism, then what role does what the anti-Semite thinks?
When we were talking, I was very disturbed.
Yeah.
Because the articles and responses from Rabbi Rothman and Rabbi Karobkin relative to intermarriage.
Yeah.
There's articles on CJ and intermarriage is good and we've got to respect
Right.
that, etc. Right. And their responses were excellent. Okay. But what I'm leading to is certain ideas that are being promoted, discussed today by Reform Judaism, and elements of conservative Judaism do not enable Jewish continuity. And if there's not continuity, then it's destructive.
You're making a powerful statement. You're saying there's a value to Jewish continuity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's your perspective. The fact is that the argument, why is Jewish continuity significant?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you can't have a Jewish nation if you don't have continuity, because there'll be no people.
So who cares if there's a Jewish nation? Well, why is that important?
I guess it's a value.
I'm obviously not disagreeing. I don't disagree with you, but the point is that if you argue Jewish continuity,
how can you claim how can you claim that you're committed to Judaism if you're not committed to continuity? It's an oxymoron.
What is Judaism?
Commitment to the Noahide laws.
So then that's anyone in the world.
Yeah.
What's Judaism?
Commitment to our Torah.
And why does the Torah make distinction between one person and the other?
Well, you can get into all of that at the end of the day.
Yeah, but the fact is that you have a value of Jewish continuity. You have a value of Jewish passion for the continuation of a group of people called Jews. Okay? If everyone in the world became good people and lovely people and so forth, what would be the need for Jews? I mean, the point is that the argument of intermarriage is, hey, listen, I married someone who's a fine person, we have a great life, we abide by moral and ethical values, we do a lot of chesed and charity, we won't call it chesed, we do a lot of great acts and so forth, and we just don't define ourselves within the particulars of this specific group. But we're good people. We're not promoting cannibalism, right? So why do I have to be Jewish? In other words, when you argue Jewish continuity, it's obviously a very strong value for you. You go up to someone and say Jewish continuity, the person will sit there and say, why? Why do I have to identify as a Jew? I'm a good person, right? I want to be with a good person, so why not identify as a Jew? And now, I'm not talking halachically here. Halachically, you have the argument from God and so forth and so forth. But the fact is that then you have to say, okay, so why did God create a special people and so forth and so forth? It's a different argument. That's an argument that says, because I believe this is what God wants. It's a different argument. But when you start arguing Jewish continuity, what I find is that what I find very, very, very powerful is that people argue it and assume that it's a given. It's not necessarily a given. The fact is that there are a lot of people out there who say, listen, I don't want Jewish continuity because it creates friction. To say it leads to, it leads to friction between people. Why can't everyone marry everyone else and just get along? The argument, one of the things that a lot of people don't recognize, let's say in terms of the Israeli-Arab argument, okay? See, the argument is not Jews and Arabs. That's not the argument. That's part of the argument. But the essential argument, especially of the Western world, is you all live in the same land. Why don't you just get together and hang out together? So you have different cultural things. Hey, listen, we're in Canada. We have churches and synagogues and other places atheists can hang out and so forth and so forth. We all get along. So why don't you just create a nice democratic state and just get along? Okay? What do you need to be Jewish people? You just hang out together. You're all good people. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not advocating this, obviously. But the fact is that why is it so significant to have a Jewish people? Yeah, the truth is that when everyone else around was sacrificing their kids to idols, and you had this group that says, we don't stand, we think there's something wrong with killing people, okay, we think there's something wrong. Hey, then I understand why I'm part of that group. But the fact is that basically, I remember being asked that question by a 16-year-old who was going out with a non-Jew, it seemed, and she said, "Listen, we're good people anyway. So what's the difference? Why should I only go out with Jews? Why? Because we have a Pesach Seder and they have an Easter Sunday dinner. What do you think the difference is? Just family getting together? What? It's so important that you have to call it a Pesach Seder?" I said, "Listen, he's a good guy. I'm okay. Why can't we just hang out together?" The point is that what is the reason for Jewish continuity? So you have an argument, if you're a halachic argument, but the thing that I find interesting is how many people assume that it's a value. What's the value? Right, because Jews have been around for 5,000 years. It would be unfortunate if this people is no longer around. Why? The Hittites were around. They're not around anymore. Does it bother you? Is it a great loss that there are no more Hittites in the world? Right? Or Phoenicians? I mean, and if you talk in terms of Jewish values, then yeah, what do you need Jewish values? So you're right. The problem with Reform Conservative Judaism is that their values are basically the same as everyone else's values. So therefore, what makes them distinct? So therefore, they're now bringing out more ritual and so forth and so forth. But the point is that I find that I think it's significant for people to understand what the different values that we represent as Jews. But can a non-Jew adopt those values? Yes. So in the end, why is it that a Jew can't marry a non-Jew? Because God said. Okay, and God said it's important for the Jewish people to continue. Okay, that's the value from God. But to give a separate argument for that's like I'm asking you. Give me, why is it important for there to be Jews in the world?
Well, it was the Dennis Prager. Last week he indicated that if not for the Ten Commandments, there would be no moral conflict.
There was very, very significant for there to be Jews in the world 3,000 years ago. Guess what? A lot of other people talk about the Ten Commandments. Okay? Guess what? Dennis Prager's talking about the Ten Commandments. Is he talking about the divine gift of the Ten Commandments? Are the Ten Commandments actually applicable to all human beings? Well, everyone thinks it is, but that's not necessarily so, because non-Jews are not really supposed to keep Shabbat. and so forth. But the fact is what he's saying was it important that there be a nation in this world 3,000 years ago that started preaching morality? Yes. Hey, we've done such a good job
that everybody does it.
So a lot more people do it now.
No. The world is still governed by huge groups that don't.
Okay, so why Jews, and are Jews the one who are going to do it? Now the truth of the matter is what your argument then becomes is what are the values you're promoting?
I think Jews are obligated to do it.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that so many Jews.
Not a nice to do, it's a need to do.
Okay, and that's why so many Jews in the United States support Obama, because they really believe that the values of peace and caring about other people are most significant. They find it, how can a Jew care more for the land than for other human beings? People don't get it. And I'm not taking a stand in favor. I'm not saying, but people don't get it. Jews who are promoting this two-state solution believe they're doing so as Jews and believe that this is Jewish values, and they believe that the people who are arguing for.
And I also believe they're misinformed.
No, they're not misinformed, because you're assuming they care about an actual understanding of what you. Well, okay, let me ask you. What do you mean by misinformed?
Well, I don't believe they've thought through the implications of what they're doing.
Okay, so what you're saying is you disagree practically. In other words, you're saying they're absolutely correct. In other words, there's an issue that exists in terms of people who are. Pardon?
Water?
No, I'm fine. I have my Coke over here. There are people who. There are two groupings within the people who are very much against a two-state solution. One is the pragmatic, and the other one is the what do you call it? The ideal. Okay. What I mean by the pragmatic is the pragmatic would sit there and say, of course we want a two-state solution. Of course we want to split everything. Okay? Unfortunately, we don't have a partner we can have peace with. You want to split, they'd even say, some of the people say, you want to split Yerushalayim for peace? I'm all for it. This land is not, this land is not worth one life, Jew or non-Jew. Right? Hey, that's what we're in favor of. But unfortunately, it's not practical. That's one viewpoint, which means the ideal is that two-state solution. We sadly, unfortunately, regretfully can't do it. There's the other view, which is the idealist, which basically says it's our land. We want the whole of Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And the argument is stronger because there's no other practical solution anyways. Now, in that regard, there are people who feel one way, there are people who feel in their hearts we like a one-state solution, and but they understand that practically that's the only possibility right now. But the fact is you're dealing with a question. What you're finding is with the people who are arguing two-state solution, even though practically it's ridiculous, they're just extending their Jewish values, and they're not seeing those. So if you're saying that they're misinformed on the pragmatic, right? Okay, yeah, of course we all want a two-state solution. You're just pragmatically incorrect. That's one argument. But when you hear people talk two-state solution, a lot of people aren't just saying, well, we totally agree with you in principle, right? It should be a two-state solution, okay? The land is not worth one more life. But unfortunately, practically it won't work. Okay, now what's the reality there? The fact is that both sides would define themselves as heavily Jewish. That's where you get into the definition of Jew. What does it really mean to be Jewish? Now, by extension, What you then lead into is the aspect of continuity. You're raising another issue in terms of a nation that stands for moral principles. The fact is a nation that stands for moral principles, this becomes a nation that says we are supposed to be a light to the non-Jewish world. So that side, like you take Yeshaya Leibowitz might be the most powerful figure of that side, saying we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. And that side usually is much more dovish when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, because you have sensitivity to other people. Therefore they say, listen, it's this people's lands also. We have to be sensitive to that. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of different overlapping issues. A lot of people in terms of Jewish continuity don't even think about it.
Well, flip the question. What does it mean not to be Jewish? And I don't mean halakha.
Be a good person. Just a non-Jewish person. It just means, hey, be a good person. Be a caring human being. Not Jewish in that way. I mean, the fact is that 3,000 years ago, we Jews really we stood for something very different than the rest of the world. Nowadays, the problem is, how do we stay on different than the rest of the world on moral issues? And it's very hard to define it. Where are we different on the ethical issues? Is the only difference in spiritual?
The difference is the mass of the world has to have the courage to act morally. We don't even have to have the courage. We're instructed to act morally.
That's if you're observant.
Correct.
Yeah. So the fact is that already you're dealing with that God told you to be different. Okay. Once you bring God into the mix, then there's no issue of the need for continuity, because God said you have to be different. You see, this is an interesting point. Yeah.
This may be a whole different road, but you said because God, you said the Orthodox, that's the Orthodox, because God instructed us to be more. Well, what about the Orthodox who aren't? There are plenty of Orthodox people who are not morally active
so that
in their own communities.
Well, that comes to this definition of moral. There are Orthodox individuals who don't maintain the standards, right? There are individual Orthodox individuals who commit adultery, okay? There's individual Orthodox individuals who may steal, okay? So that's one issue. We're not talking about the individual sin of Orthodox individuals. What you're then dealing with is what about the morality? Now there's another issue there, in the sense that a lot of Orthodox individuals don't necessarily share a lot of what we perceive to be general ethics. Okay? And that yields another issue, that they argue their ethics, they're obviously not going to be in the same category as other people. Like, for example, gets into issue of what is moral, what's not moral, from a more general, perspective. And there are Orthodox Jews who would argue that it's not moral. I mean, this is one of the issues with
the reason I thought of it when he said that is we saw recently a show, which I think I mentioned to you, where this whole group of Orthodox Jews were caught for fraud, money laundering, kidney selling overseas.
That's the exception, though.
But it involved a lot of people. It wasn't one person.
Okay. So what you're dealing with is two issues there. A, that they knew they were acting immorally. That's one possibility. The same way as a guy who says, I know the law says you're not supposed to eat bacon, I just really wanted to eat bacon. Okay, that's one possibility. Okay? And in many ways, a lot of people who maintain what I would call the ritual Orthodox practice, for some reason they're more they find leniency in other things. There are there's cases left and right. There's films done of prostitutes in New York City who talk about how so many of their best clients are the guys who have. That's not a statement about every chas in the world. There are people, for some reason, they're Hasidim, There are people for some reason that they still want to maintain part of that Hasidic community. It might be that they feel bad when they, do the Hecht after they go, but they're overcome by the Yitzhar, if you want to put it in simplistic terms. So there are Jews like that. There are other Jews who somehow don't abide by the same morality as exists in the world. So therefore you have individuals who, let's say, are involved with selling kidneys. They'll sit there and say, that's a glacial law. I don't have to follow that law. Then comes an issue of what really is moral. Is it moral to sell kidneys or not moral to sell kidneys from a halachic perspective? But the fact is that you do find certain attitudes within the Orthodox, within the Orthodox world, that has a certain attitude towards values. I know of a case I've mentioned before, of a rabbi who was very much involved was a member of a bezdin, a prominent bezdin, and very much involved in assisting women getting a get. And there was a woman who needed a get who was from a Hasidic community, and they went to this dayan in the Hasidic community and said, listen, we really have to work to get her a get. And the dayan said, okay, what's the problem? He says, he beats her. Her husband beats her. So this dayan, the Hasidic, says, let her go back and be a good wife, and he won't beat her anymore. Okay? So the fact is that there are people who don't perceive wife beating to be such a major moral issue within the Orthodox world. That's another issue. That's a whole different issue of how people develop their own perspectives and so forth. It's a very interesting perspective. It also has something to do with sociological perspectives and so forth and so forth. It goes back to your question of how do you understand romance and the purpose of marriage. There are, for example, the Mishlei says, spare the rod and spoil the child. That's a statement in Mishlei. Okay?
Can you repeat it?
Spare the rod and spoil the child.
The oldest expression, I think.
Okay, so the fact is that the best way to bring up a child is with corporal punishment. This has become an issue because nowadays we look upon corporal punishment, even from a parent to a child, as something very negative. So how do you understand that statement in Mishlei? So there are Orthodox rules. This statement pasuk. This is it. I don't really care what the general world says. Other people sit there and say, gee, the general world has developed psychological investigation of why this is so.
Which
so
comes
now,
back to your topic,
right,
the perspective of today's society.
Right.
Barbacoa, Rosa, etc., etc.
Right.
You do not hit a child. You do not spank a child.
Well,
there are other...
But then how do you deal with the idea that there's a concept? The Gemara, I think Gemara Makkos actually says that if you don't hit your kid, you're doing him a great disservice. So the point is that it's somewhat of an issue. The point is these are all some issues, but the thing is what you're arguing is that, and this began with the Jewish continuity issue. Where it fits into this idea of a frame of reference is that you took something as a given. You took a simple idea as a given, that we're in favor of Jewish continuity.
No, I'm not taking it as a given.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the regard for Jewish continuity, how can you be proud to be a Jew?
So I'm telling you that there are people who are proud to be Jewish who don't have the same view of Jewish continuity as you do, which means that they don't share your view of Jewish continuity. That's what I mean by a given. The fact is, your argument is these people who say, hey, I'm proud to be Jewish, and I think intermarriage is okay. And your argument is, how can you stand for Jewish continuity? And my argument is because maybe they don't care. So the point is you took it, what I'm saying by a given, I'm not trying to be critical, I'm saying when you say as a given, is you would assume anyone who has a value in Jewishness thinks there's a value in continuity. And what I'm saying is, I don't know if that's necessarily so.
I'm saying it may not be so.
Right.
And there's a major gap in value systems.
But the arguments of people who stand for continuity, if you look at the arguments for people who stand for continuity, there's a real question: is why? Yeah, it's true that you know it's true. Like, for example, there was I remember I saw a UGA guy write this. He says there's no doubt. The guy wrote, there's no doubt that the best way to ensure the continuity of the Jewish people is through the Orthodox lifestyle. Okay, if you want people to be strongly identified as a Jew, right, you want them having a lifestyle of this nature. But guess what? It's actually the only way I can ensure continuity of a Jew. Then my kids won't be Jewish. Because I don't think it's that important for them to be Jewish. I don't think they have to suffer through an Orthodox lifestyle in order to be Jewish. That's what this guy said. And he was a big mocker in UGA. And I was just, you know, if you're telling me that's what it takes to be Jewish, good. Why should I make a kid suffer through that? Of this lifestyle? Okay, and the side to that is, and he could be a moral, good person otherwise. Well, the fact of the matter is that when you were Jewish, it meant you weren't killing children in idolatrous sacrifice. Then there was a reason to be Jewish. And you're telling yourself, if you're saying that, hey, it's important to be Jewish because we don't eat pork. Oh, don't kill? A lot of people don't kill. Don't murder? A lot of people don't murder. Don't steal? A lot of people don't steal. Right? Be faithful? A lot of people are faithful. Right? But being Jewish means, you know, I don't drive on Shabbos. You can sit there and say, well, why exactly is that important to continue? Now, once you throw God into the mix, because God said it. Now, the fact is then you have to come up with moral arguments. And I think you were alluding to it.
There's also the emotional, psychological argument.
If you have that emotional, psychological argument, if you really care. You know, the first time I saw this, there was a book I saw in '79. It was put out a book called How to Stop an Intermarriage. That book just infuriated me. Because the book said, here's a value, we want to stop an intermarriage, and here's ways of doing it. And every way was, here's how you can trick someone into not being in a marriage. Here's the lie. He would say it's a lie. Here's a lie. Here's something which really effectively is a lie. Or here's how you can manipulate someone else to be against intermarriage. You're saying intermarriage is wrong. Therefore, you figure out ways of being against intermarriage. And one of them is, all intermarriages don't work out. Everyone is miserable who's intermarried. Then I read a book then I read the book Cosell, who's intermarried and had a wonderful marriage. It's not true that every intermarriage ends up in hell.
Bridget loved Bernie.
Yeah. The fact is that what happens is a lot of times when you see arguments for continuity, it's with certain assumptions. And the fact is what you have to do is read through those assumptions. See, that's one of the reasons. I'm still in the picture here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's one of the reasons that I find myself somewhat at odds with people when I raise questions or promote questions. It's one of the reasons people don't like questions. Because so much of our world is based upon certain assumptions. Okay, once you have those assumptions, then you go on from there. And you can build a tremendous edifice based upon these assumptions. The problem is how often do you investigate those assumptions? What I find is that a lot of questioning really is, how do you know that assumption is correct? Or is that assumption correct? And that's a lot of the issue there. See, the thing that you sent me last week from Rabbi Korupkin, where he basically put together.
I told you I sent him the introduction to Dennis Prager.
You were trying to get it from Rabbi Korupkin.
Right, but his argument was a very straightforward argument, that the purpose of the Shabbos Project was to promote Jewish peoplehood and maintaining and Shabbos in any way you
Come
want
to celebrate it in whatever way
right,
they celebrate
right, it can create a sense of unity among the people. Okay, and it's a true argument. It's a tremendous. It actually is a very true argument. And there's this idea of saying, hey, listen, Jews should keep Shabbos in any way they can, but Shabbos being a different day is a way of connecting as a Jew. Very worthwhile. That's one of the reasons that Reform Judaism went back to keeping Shabbos, when it went to Sunday keeping Shabbos. Fact is, though, is there are many people who say, who would sit there and say, no, purpose of Shabbos is not Jewish peoplehood. Right? Shabbos has its own purpose, and it only has a value when it's following halacha. And therefore, a person keeping Shabbos in a non-halachic manner is actually doing something that that some people would find even more offensive, because they are not promoting the actual value of Shabbos, right? Which is another argument. What about the fact that there are... Let me give you an interesting question, okay? Okay, it's an interesting question, actually. Here's a guy who you want to set up to be married, okay? You have two girls to set him up with, right? One's not Jewish, and one's Jewish, but will never go to mikveh. Okay? Which one should you set them up with? The non-Jew or the Jewish woman who will never go to mikveh? Which one should you set them up with?
That sounds like a trick question.
Well, the fact of the matter is the question actually is halachically like this. Is it permissible, in terms of creating a shidduch between a Jewish boy and a Jewish girl, knowing that they're not going to observe the laws of Taras Mishpacha? It's an interesting question, in the sense that you cannot promote someone doing something contrary to halacha, right? You don't invite someone over on Shabbos, let's say, because they're going to drive or whatever, right? So, can you set up a Jew and a Jewish woman with who will not be observing the laws of Taras Mishpacha? Okay, because
well, technically, I'd say the answer is no, you can't set them up.
Well, technically, that would seem to be the simple technical answer, because you're promoting their violation of the law.
Whereas the other way around, the non-Jew, you know they're not going to.
Right. Well, the non-Jew is not. The non-Jew, there's no Taras Mishpacha. The fact is that I changed the question a little bit with that, but the fact is you can't set a Jew with a non-Jew anyways, because there's also halachic problems with that also. Okay. But the fact is, the question emerges like this, is that if you have a choice of a Jew going out with a non-Jew, or a Jew going out with a Jew who is not going to go to mikveh, right? What should you do? Well, the violation, this most people will find very, very difficult to understand, but it's a worse of error for someone to sleep even with his wife when she's a nida than for this person to sleep with a non-Jew. The prohibition of sleeping with a non-Jew is less an avera than sleeping with a Jewish woman. Okay, and okay, so the question emerges of setting people up. Should you, let's say this guy already has a non-Jewish girlfriend, and you think you could set him up with a Jewish girl, knowing full well that this Jewish girl won't go to mikveh. Well, he's sleeping with the non-Jewish girlfriend, but he'll sleep with the Jewish girlfriend also without going to mikveh. Should you set him up with the Jewish girlfriend? So the truth of the matter is that technically you would say, well, technically, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who's one of the Gedolim of the previous generation, said absolutely you set him up with a Jewish girl, right? Because there's an issue of continuity, right? There's an issue of they're Jewish. Right, now the truth is it's also possible for the non-Jewish girl to convert, but the fact of the matter is...
But there's also a possibility that a chance for education. She won't go to mikveh, but she's that much closer to one step away.
Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky's response was, obviously you set a Jew up with a Jew. Okay, because there's a broader perspective here. Even though technically, in terms of the details of halacha, right, technically the avera of sleeping with a non-Jewish woman is less than the avera of sleeping with a Jewish woman. But he was basically pointing out the fact that there's also policy issues. Rabbi Yaakov was pointing out that you have to that in making halachic decisions, there are halachic decisions, there are technical halachic decisions, and there's also policy decisions that have a much broader perspective. And so he said, of course, you set up the Jew with the Jewish woman, and you try to educate them about Taras Mishpacha. The point is, though, is that these indicate a certain understanding of Jewish continuity. Now, Rav Yaakov is obviously Orthodox Jew, and believes that Kodesh Baruch Hu says there's significance in Jewish identity and the continuation of the Jewish people, which I would also promote. The point is that what's the argument I could give a secular Jew? What's the argument I could give a non-Orthodox Jew on why Jewish continuity is important? And that's not so simple. And what you're really doing is you're really basically building upon an emotion that they have, which you're going to run with. So a lot of times I won't even ask that question if I'm dealing with secular Jews. Why is Jewish continuity? You'll just make the assumption Jewish continuity is important. Okay? That's one of the reasons that if you're with a lot of people like that and someone raises a question and says, well, why is it important? A lot of times you'll say, well, it's a stupid question.
I have trouble with the Chabad philosophy, with the Jewish neshama.
Yeah.
You know, you will marry a Jew. Okay?
Yeah.
Why did your son marry? I'm not referring to Rabbi Hecht. Why did your son marry a Jew? Because I have to marry a Jew. You know, my father expects me to marry a Jew.
Right.
But the reality is, they don't practice or respect any aspect of Judaism.
Well, the argument
Why is it so important for them to marry a Jew?
That's a good. That raises the question.
You're not going to practice. You're not going to marry.
So what Chabad does, it says is the Pintaliyid, and you start there. You say you start with that perspective, okay, and you just sit there and say it's the Pintaliyid, and you'll build upon it. The fact is once you start asking questions why it's significant, Chabad's not going to go there. Their answer is because your neshama is telling you it's important. The person sits there and saying, I don't buy that answer, they're not going to go further. But the point is that in that argument, from the secular perspective, there is really, you have to start figuring out why is it important to have Jewish continuity. That leads to, you see, that leads to further issues. You see, the point is that underlying it becomes an issue of why is it significant to have a Jewish state? Why can't you have a democratic state in Israel? Yeah, we're all recognizing we don't want to be in a state run by Hamas. We all recognize we don't want to be a state run by totalitarianism. Right, that's great, right? Okay, but why a Jewish state? Not a democratic state. Now, I think a lot of Jews in Israel argue for a Jewish state because they really just want a democratic state. And that a lot of Jews in Israel, if you speak to them, they'll sit there and say, yeah, we're not against going out with Arabs, and we're not against this. We really want a democratic state. The point is, why do you want a Jewish state? And that's one of the dilemmas in Israel. Now, the fact is, if you sit there and say Jewish continuity, a lot of people... I had someone, I remember when I was in Israel years ago, and I looked at him and said, why is this so important? Like he says, well, we've been around for so many years, why is this so important? You know, what do you call it? Theodore Herzl, before the Dreyfus affair, was advocating that Jews should assimilate. Why is it so important for there to be Jews? Assimilate. Just become good people. And let our society just have secularists. Okay, well, I could be nice secularists, and we don't have to make a distinction between Jew and non-Jew. We just make a distinction that we're all good people.
Nice people and bad.
In other words, ignore the halakhic process.
Herzl didn't care.
Give it no credence.
No,
The thought process.
I'm not bringing in. Herzl wasn't halachic. The fact of the matter is that this is nothing to do with orthodoxy. What I'm saying is that you argue this from another perspective. What I'm just saying is that from an orthodox perspective, do we understand? You see, when I ask the question of why Jewish continuity is important, I'm taking it as a given, right? Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu says it's important. Now, what I then want to understand is why is it significant to have this nation continue? We've already been successful in many ways because we've really brought ethics to the world, and there are a lot of people in the world who are good people because of us. And we're talking about the distinction of Jew and non-Jew with people who are good people. There's a Noahide who comes to my Sunday morning class now, okay? And the fact of the matter is he's a very nice guy and so forth and so forth, most ethical person and so forth and so forth. When it comes down to it, right, his kids should not hang out with with Jewish kids because they shouldn't have relationships, right? Unless one of the kids want to convert. But the fact is that it's a very fine person and so forth and so forth. I understand that from a Jewish perspective. But the question that emerges is from a halachic perspective. But to the non-halachic individual, that continuity is just something that they're saying emotional. And the point is that someone can easily challenge it by saying, why is it significant? Now, then comes up the issue of how I, as an Orthodox Jew, am going to give reason to people who won't buy it because God said it's important. I will start by saying God says it's continuity, then I'll try and give some ideas of why it still has value in our world today. And it has a lot to do with the fact that you have a nation dedicated to promoting the values. That's a very dedicated nation. Then the issue arose as well. Then we should be promoting the values that are really significant, and that becomes the argument of what you would define as left-wing Jews in Israel, in America. A lot of the people who are in favor of Jewish continuity, right, are very much the people who are saying we need Jews to be around because they stand for these values, and they're the ones who are supporting Obama because they say these are the values that we're supposed to stand for. And then becomes an issue, okay, so what really is the essence of Jewish values? And then it becomes an issue where, but your values don't really, will not really have the strength to maintain continuity. But that becomes a further issue. But they're saying that, but this is what this is what we should be fighting for with continuity. And the reason we're not successful is because we're getting across these values to others. But it's a very significant discussion. But at the root of it is the recognition of our own assumptions and the questions we ask and our own frame of reference when we start off. I would say that for many of the people that I talk, I can open up by saying Jewish continuity is important, and that's a given, right? And they don't want to. This is what you're saying with Chabad. Chabad works and say Jewish continuity is a given. That's usually a given with the people that they're dealing with, and then they go on from there. If you ask the question why Jewish continuity is a given, then you have to go down a different path. But the simple response will be, come on, it is. And that becomes significant. That's why you have an aspect in terms of Israel. Yeah, I think a Jewish state is important. And why is a Jewish state important? Well, I have halachic arguments. If you're not a halachic person, why is it so important? And then you get into issues which really is frightening to a lot of secular Jews, is that these people start saying the Jewish state is important. They start saying they're overly nationalistic. their Jewishness is just extreme right-wing nationalism, which usually is.
While they're going to a make-believe
Pardon?
game. While they're going to a make-believe game and don't miss the 76 games a year.
Well, because that's not their definition of Jewishness. You're applying Shabbos. They're not saying that. They're saying the definition is the promotion of these values. Okay, but the fact is that that's why you have to understand the distinction from the frame of reference. See, the point is that to a lot of people, being Jewish has nothing to do with Shabbos. That's not what Jewishness is about. And that's a lot of people who are behind the formation of the State of Israel. Right? The fact that Shabbos is a unique day in the State of Israel, it has a lot to do with the influences of the Orthodox, the Mizrahi and the religious Orthodox. If the secular Zionists would have had Israel, would have been able to Israel on their own, they most likely would have not taken a lot of that, of what we would consider to be ritual, and say this is necessary for Jewish identity. Right? There's a lot of people who, and then you get into the issue, so how should Shabbos be different? Maybe they would have taken Saturday as their day off rather than Sunday, but for sure the buses will be running. And there's movements for the buses to run. Still Saturday is a different day. It's just that we take a lot of things as givens, and we don't question why they're given. We don't really question why. And that's the same thing with frame of reference. That's why I brought up the case beforehand, in terms of women and stuff like that. The fact of the matter is we take certain things as a given. We don't understand that we then approach life with a lot of assumptions. And part of the nature of questioning is looking into your assumptions. Sometimes the very process of learning does it. Okay, part of learning does it, and sometimes people are caught up, are sort of. I think it's always so funny when you hear people like being told Jews don't ask that question, and one of the reasons that I always get into trouble is because someone will say that we Jews don't ask that kind of question, and then I'll go to someone and say, really? Nachmanides asked that question. I guess he's not Jewish, right? Because he asked that question. Okay, and usually people get upset with me when I do that, because the reason they say we don't ask that question is because they don't know what to do when the assumption is challenged. But guess what? The Gedolei Yisrael did ask those questions. It's an aspect of learning. But it's an aspect of learning that was done very gingerly, because you have to have someone who is going to allow for the development of the answer. That's why when you deal with issues of intermarriage, it's a really tough issue, because if I told you that this white should not marry this black, you call me a racist. So I'm going to say a Jew shouldn't marry a non-Jew? Why? Both good people. And then you get some ridiculous answers. The fact of the matter is you can get some halakhic answers.
That's what we talked about earlier.
What?
If a Jew is marrying a non-Jew, we should not be attending the wedding.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The reception is fine.
That's my compromise, because you have to deal with the reality of family. You have to also deal with the reality that the people who are doing it are not making a statement of fear. They're not basically saying, I'm against Judaism. They're in many ways real Tinnik Shenishbas who have a different value system. I just put up something today on United with Israel, where my point is that I'm very concerned about the promotion or the idea that we're getting involved with somehow okaying contests about drawing pictures of Muhammad. And I understand the reason why you're trying to do it. You're trying to point out the real perception of radical Islam, because their response to people drawing pictures of Muhammad is uncalled for. But the fact is that what you're doing, though, is that you are promoting the disrespect of a religion, which really is contrary to the value of freedom of religion, and something that we Jews have always expressed, respect for other religions. So I'm not sure if the way of fighting radical Islam through, my article basically says, I think you have to consider the balance that there is another value, like the article is called I Am Not Charlie Hebdo. That the fact of the matter is that what happened to Charlie Hebdo was horrendous and so forth and so forth. I also didn't support Charlie Hebdo's values either. They also mark Judaism, but the fact of the matter is that I would not sit there and say it's okay, that Charlie Hebdo had a right to do what they did. They have a right, but I would not sit there and say and be proud, someone doing that.
No, but yet, as Dan Prager pointed out, the Book of Mormons, which has been on Broadway for years.
Yeah.
We don't see the Mormons blowing up.
Absolutely, but the fact of the matter is, but my point.
I'm not saying it's respectful, and you don't see Monty Python's
but the fact is,
portrayal of Moses, or the
I understand that, but I'm not going to be the one who does the disrespectful act. That's my point. My point is that if Charlie Hebdo wants to do that, they have a right to do that. I want to teach my kids that's not what we do. That's the value I want to teach within my world. And the fact is that I want to say, no, we don't do that. Now, that's my point, that there's another value, and I want to promote my value as well. Okay, now, the point being that I'm not going to, I don't want to have to attack another value of mine, which is the value of respecting other religions, for the pragmatic reason of trying to show what these other people are like. The point is there's a whole variety of values involved. My point is, though, is that we have variant, it's a blog now in United Israel, mostly I'll put up on Facebook soon. But the fact is that's an indication of the values we live with and the balancing the values that we have to face. There's certain Jewish ways of balancing values. Now the truth is that becomes another issue. That's an issue of a Western value of respect for religion. What's the halachic perspective of that? And then I have to balance my understanding of halacha with Western values and so forth. All I'm saying is that there are a lot of issues involved, a lot of frame of references, and we have to balance them out.
Your original in discussing the topic, you said in perspective to the culture around us, you mentioned, for example, you mentioned Jenner, and there was another example, I can't remember.
Pamela Geller. That was
Pamela Geller.
The question of how to deal with same-sex, with transsexuals, and the fact is that transgender and these become issues with our balancing of our society and with our perspective. I mean, the fact is, you see with homosexuality, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there was no argument. I mean, we just saw the Imitation Game. Mm-hmm. Okay, Imitation Game the fact that the guy who's commits suicide at the end of his life, and because he's gay and he's not accepted and was found guilty of, that's a very, very difficult thing to see, because the guy basically saved the world. Yeah. Right? It's a real challenge, but the fact is we're looking at it today, And I thought when he went through his whole story to the cop, they would drop the charges.
Yeah.
He would basically say, I saved the country. Right? The cops still prosecuted him on the issue of homosexuality. Very different frames of references. I mean, the fact is that that's how our society looks at it. Like nowadays, it's a question of many Orthodox rabbis trying to understand the prohibitions against homosexuality in the Torah. Yeah, there are arguments and there's reasons and so forth and so forth, but the real question is why did God create people with an attraction for people of the same sex? And the real question is not so much the sexual aspect, it is the love aspect. And the fact that these people are saying, I can only find that love that takes away loneliness, that with someone of the same sex, and we all understand that to be a very important consideration. Everyone needs that type of relationship, that kind of aspect. And these people seem to only find it from the same sex. So a lot of Orthodox Jews, the halacha says you can't do it. So that's the halacha. But do I kind of understand it? No. If you look back in comments on the mitzvahs from 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and when it came to the prohibitions of homosexuality, a lot of Rishonim just wrote, "Never you do it," because rationalism had a very straightforward reason. This is clearly wrong. I mean, okay, which I could see the argument also, but it just shows you how the frame of reference can change perspectives, right? Anyways, but that's all part of it. But the question what it really leads to is questions, and a lot of people are concerned about those questions because it gets you questioning your assumptions. It gets you looking at yourself.
How did your example of Pamela Geller, what were you thinking?
The fact of the matter is I find that her creation of a contest for Mohammed cartoons.
Okay. Going back to
I don't think that's the way to make. I don't think that's what.
No, I believe she's lowering herself by doing that.
Yeah.
Because she's a very credible.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Introducing that,
she took it down.
It's inciting.
Right.
And why incite? I mean.
Well, the fact is that it also is inciting, but it also says, listen, there's another value, the value of respecting another religion, and here I am encouraging people not to respect another religion. Now, then you get into halachic questions. How does the halach look upon respecting other religions and so forth? But the fact is, we live within a world of freedom of religion, and part of freedom of religion is respecting other religions. And in North America, it's a very important concept within our value system, and we Jews have benefited. In fact, in a lot of cases, we have promoted freedom of religion, even contrary to certain halachic conclusions, because we want to maintain our own rights. Freedom of religion gives us the rights to practice Judaism. So, like for example, Ramosha said, it's well known that Ramosha said that the position of the Orthodox vis-a-vis abortion should be pro-choice. Okay? A lot of people find that shocking, right? Because everyone thinks, because Orthodoxy is much more pro-life, and when it comes to Noachides, it would even be more pro-life. But the argument is that within the pro-life camp are certain viewpoints that would be contrary to halacha. There are certain people who had a point in time where they would not abort to save the mother's life, even when it's halachically mandated to abort. So Morrison says that our first concern has to be ensure that people can follow halacha. So even though pro-choice would mean that people would be able to act contrary to halacha, because a lot of times abortion is contrary to halacha, the fact is that our consideration in working with freedom of religion has to be the right of us to be able to practice our religion. And this becomes a situation where it becomes an idea where we have to sort of, in a promotion of our own rights, promote other people's rights. And that's why, in a certain way, we're left with this issue where I think there's a certain aspect where if we want to be treated in a positive way, we have to respect other people's religions, and so forth. And I don't think the answer is to do something like that.